The resilient Ilara. Attention, friends. If you are looking for a story that grabs you from the first second and makes you feel every emotion, you have come to the right place. Are you ready? Then, like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next stories, and get ready for a night that will change everything. The grand ballroom of the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico City shimmered under the golden light of chandeliers, a temple of wealth and power. Politicians, CEOs, and celebrities mingled. Their laughter blended with the notes of a string quartet. Waiters glided through the sea of tuxedos and dazzling gowns, offering champagne on silver trays. To outsiders, it looked like a perfect evening, the ideal charity gala. But beneath that polished surface, a storm was brewing that would shake everyone in the room. In the furthest corner, Ilara Jones stood alone, one hand on her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant, her body carried the fragility of exhaustion and the silent strength of a mother determined to protect her unborn child. Her dress was simple, discreet, and from 2 seasons ago, a soft lavender shade that she had adjusted herself to accommodate her changing body. Against the dazzling backdrop of haute couture and diamond necklaces, she seemed almost invisible. Invisible. That was what her husband wanted her to be. Dominic Vance, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating the arrogance of a man who believed he owned the world, stood at the center of a laughing crowd. In his hand, a glass of aged Bordeaux. At his side, clinging to his arm like an ornament, was Celine Rivers, the mistress, the woman everyone in the room whispered about, but no one dared to confront. She was 26, ambitious, with jet black hair and a dress so tight it seemed painted on her. While Dominic's wife hid in the shadows, Celine bathed in the spotlight, her laugh loud and shrill. Ilara felt her chest tighten. She was not just humiliated, she was suffocating. The world she once believed was built on love and partnership had become a theater of cruelty. And tonight, that cruelty would erupt in a way no one could ignore. The moment came, almost too fast. A waiter passed by Ilara, and her hand trembled. The glass of red wine he was carrying slipped, splashing the immaculate white sleeve of Dominic's designer suit. The room fell silent. Dominic froze. Then, slowly, he turned to her. His face darkened. His lips tightened into a sneer. "Stupid woman," he hissed, his voice sharp enough to cut the air. The murmurs of nearby guests became audible, but no one dared to intervene. Ilara's heart pounded. I'm sorry," she whispered, clutching her belly protectively. The "I'm sorry" was not enough. In a flash of rage, Dominic grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her to the center of the ballroom. The quartet stopped playing. Glasses clinked nervously as people moved aside, not knowing whether to stop him or to remain silent. Power and money had the ability to silence even the most just voices. Then it happened. Dominic pushed Ilara until she fell to her knees. He took the decorative whip from a gala auction exhibit, a leather piece meant for collectors, and raised it above his head. The first blow slammed against her back. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Ilara screamed. Her body arched in pain as she protected her stomach with trembling arms. The second lash came harder, and then another. Each blow was a public declaration, a savage reminder of his control. Countless eyes watched, some horrified, some motionless, some pretending to look away. But the blows continued. 10 lashes, 20, 50. The number increased, and Ilara's body shook under the relentless strikes. Her vision blurred with tears. Every muscle screamed in agony, but her mind desperately clung to a single thought. The baby. Protect the baby. And you? At what point in the story do you think Alara should have left Dominic? Comment your answer below. Around the 100th lash, whispers grew among the guests. Is he crazy? She's pregnant. Someone should stop him. Yet no one moved. No one wanted to challenge Dominic Vance, the financial magnate who had built a reputation for cruelty. Celine, the mistress, stood by, smirking. She leaned toward another woman and whispered loud enough for Alara to hear. How pathetic. She can't even hold a glass. Alara's body trembled. The humiliation was worse than the pain. She felt stripped of her dignity, treated not like a wife, not even like a human being, but as a spectacle. 200 lashes, 250. The whip tore through the air, each blow leaving bruises on her back, each moment being seared into her memory. Her sobs filled the room, but Dominic's fury drowned them out. When the whip slammed down for the 300th time, the room held its breath. Alara collapsed on the marble floor, her cheek pressed against the cold stone, her arms instinctively wrapped around her belly, whispering a silent prayer that her child would survive what her body could barely endure. Dominic stood over her, panting, his chest rising and falling to the rhythm of his cruelty. He threw the whip aside and sneered, "That's what happens when you embarrass me in public." Silence. And then, from the shadows near the stage, a figure stepped forward, tall and imposing. His presence instantly changed the energy of the room. The murmurs grew louder as recognition spread through the crowd. Victor Sterling, a billionaire financier, a man whose power extended across continents, whose very name could topple careers. His eyes fixed on Dominic, cold and unyielding. Then, they slowly softened as they turned to Alara, broken, trembling, but still clinging to her belly with a mother's instinctive strength. The room held its breath. "Enough!" Victor's voice thundered, low and dangerous. "You touch her again, and you'll answer to me." The legacy of kindness. To understand the brutality of that night, one must understand the man who wielded the whip. Dominic Vance was not always a monster in Alara's eyes. Once he had been the man who made her laugh, who promised to protect her, who swore he would give her the world. But love has a cruel way of turning into something else when power, greed, and pride poison the heart. Dominic had built his identity on appearances. To his colleagues, he was the savvy investor, the man who could close a deal over a glass of whiskey and a handshake. To his neighbors, he was the perfect gentleman, smiling as he carried Alara's groceries, waving to the neighborhood children. And to the strangers at the gala, he was the rising star of Wall Street, the man everyone wanted to know. But behind closed doors, the mask faded. At home, Dominic's charm soured into cruelty. He would berate her for cooking meals that were too bland. He would reprimand her for gaining weight during her pregnancy, as if her swollen belly was an insult instead of a miracle. He controlled the bank accounts, the passwords, even the thermostat. To him, power wasn't enough unless it came with domination. And then there was Celine Rivers. Celine was everything Dominic craved, young, flashy, and hungry for attention. At 26, she was just starting her career as a marketing associate at his firm. But she played her cards with ruthless precision. She laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. She would lean into him when he talked, brushing his arm, letting her perfume linger. She knew exactly what she was doing. And Dominic, already unsettled in his marriage, was easy prey. It started with late work meetings, then business trips. Alara wasn't invited to, then whispers, rumors, and photos of Dominic arriving at events with a mysterious woman in red. When Alara confronted him, he sneered, "You're just paranoid. You're just hormonal." But Alara wasn't paranoid. Celine had smoothly slipped into Dominic's world, not as a secret, but as an accessory. And unlike Alara, Celine didn't ask him for anything. Not stability, not loyalty, not love. She wanted luxury, and Dominic was eager to provide it. On the night of the gala, the two of them played their parts to perfection. Dominic strutted like a king. Celine clung to him like a jewel. Every laugh, every whisper, every stolen glance was a dagger aimed at Alara's heart. When Alara spilled the wine, Dominic saw more than an accident. He saw an opportunity. His entire life had been built on control. Now, in front of the city's elite, his pregnant wife had embarrassed him. A splash of wine on his sleeve was enough to ignite the storm that had been brewing inside him. But it wasn't about the stain. It was about domination. He needed to remind everyone, especially Alara, who held the power, so he grabbed the whip. The cruelty of his act was not spontaneous. It was deliberate. Dominic knew exactly what he was doing. Each lash was not just a punishment. It was theater. With every blow, he sent a message to the crowd. This is what happens when you challenge me. He reveled in the silence of the onlookers, their fear, their unwillingness to intervene. And Celine? She didn't flinch. She sipped her champagne as if she were watching a performance. Her smile widened with each lash. To her, Alara's pain was entertainment, proof that she had replaced the wife not only in Dominic's bed, but in his world. However, beneath her sneering smile, Celine's mind was calculating. She was no more loyal to Dominic than he was to Alara. She was loyal to ambition, to power. The moment Dominic's empire cracked, she would abandon him without a second thought. But for now, she basked in the glow of borrowed influence. The crowd murmured in horror, but no one stepped forward. No one dared. Dominic fed off that fear. He loved the way people averted their eyes, the way even the wealthiest men hesitated. It fed his ego, but he made a fatal mistake. In his arrogance, Dominic forgot that not everyone in that room feared him. One man, standing at the edge of the ballroom, watched with eyes of steel. Victor Sterling. Victor had lived in the world of power long enough to recognize a tyrant when he saw one. He had built his empire not through cruelty, but through strategy, through patience, through a code of honor that men like Dominic could never comprehend. And as he watched Alara suffer, as he saw the whip tear through her trembling body, something stirred inside him. This was no longer about a woman being humiliated. It was about justice. Dominic delivered the final lash. Tossing the whip aside, his chest heaved. He looked at Alara with contempt, his voice dripping with venom. That's what happens when you make me look weak. The crowd fell silent, stifled by the weight of fear. But Victor stepped forward. His footsteps echoed on the marble, firm and deliberate. Every head turned. Dominic sneered when he saw him. "Sterling?" he scoffed, straightening his tuxedo. "Did you come to join the show?" Victor's gaze was like ice. "I did not come to watch a man beat his pregnant wife," he said calmly. "I came to end this." The room held its breath. Celine's smile wavered. Dominic's sneer froze. For the first time that night, the power in the room shifted. Not to Dominic, not to Celine, but to Victor Sterling. Alara, trembling on the floor, lifted her head just enough to meet Victor's eyes. In them, she saw no pity. She saw recognition, strength, a promise. Dominic laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "End this! Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Victor stepped closer, looming over him. "Yes," he said coldly. "A coward." The crowd erupted in whispers. Cameras flashed. For the first time, Dominic looked unsure. Celine tugged at his arm, whispering, "Let's go." But Dominic, blinded by pride, stood his ground. Victor didn't flinch. His voice carried across the room, steady and authoritative. "You touch her again, Vance, and I will destroy you in ways you cannot even begin to imagine." The ballroom was no longer a place of music and laughter. It was a battlefield. The violins remained silent. The champagne flutes stood untouched on the tables. Every eye was fixed on the confrontation unfolding in the center of the room, between Dominic Vance, the man who believed himself untouchable, and Victor Sterling, the billionaire who had just challenged him in front of an audience of hundreds. Ilara remained on the floor, her cheek pressed against the marble, her breathing shallow, her arms cradling her belly, as if her body could only protect her unborn child. The pain radiated down her back, but another sensation cut through it. Disbelief. Someone had finally spoken up. After years of silence, after endless humiliation, someone had dared to stand up for her. Dominic, however, was furious. His face twisted into a snarl as he straightened his tuxedo. "Coward!" he spat at Victor. "You think you can just walk into my life and insult me? This is my wife. She's mine to discipline." Gasps went through the crowd. Even in a room where power excused almost everything, Dominic's words crossed a line. The whispers rose to a roar. Did he just say that? Is he insane in front of the cameras? Victor didn't flinch. His voice cut through the murmurs, quiet, but lethal. "She is not a possession. She is not yours to break. She is a human being, a mother. And tonight you have shown the world what kind of man you really are." The cameras flashed. The press smelled blood. This was no longer just a gala. It was a scandal unfolding in real time, and every photograph would be tomorrow's headline. Dominic realized it too. He turned, scanning the faces of investors, politicians, and board members, people his fragile empire depended on. Their expressions were not of admiration. They were of horror, of disgust, of revulsion. He could feel the empire he had built teetering on the brink of collapse. Panic flickered behind his eyes, but pride was stronger. He grabbed Ilara by the arm, pulling her to her feet. She staggered, her body weak, her breath catching. The crowd gasped again as she cried out in pain. "Come on!" Dominic snarled, his voice breaking. "She's fine. She just needs discipline, not pity." Celine shifted uncomfortably beside him. For the first time, her sneering smile wavered. She, too, could feel the judgment burning her. To be Dominic's accessory was one thing. To be an accomplice to his brutality was another. Her perfectly painted smile trembled, but she held on to his arm anyway, reluctant to abandon him just yet. Victor's eyes darkened. He stepped forward, his voice like thunder. "Let go of her!" Dominic laughed, though it sounded forced. "Or what? You'll write a check? You think money makes you powerful?" He shoved Ilara toward the crowd, her body collapsing once more against the floor. "This is my life, Sterling, not yours." But the words didn't land the way he wanted. The crowd didn't see strength. They saw weakness. They saw desperation. And they saw Victor Sterling standing, unyielding, commanding the room with nothing but his presence. Ilara lifted her head, her tear-stained face illuminated by the chandeliers. For years, she had been silenced. But tonight, with the cameras clicking and the eyes watching, something inside her broke. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice trembling but audible in the hushed room. "You are not a husband. You are a monster." The words hung in the air like lightning. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, exclamations of shock. For the first time, Ilara had spoken out against him in public. For the first time, she had refused to cower. Dominic's face turned crimson. He lunged at her, hand raised. But before he could strike, Victor grabbed his wrist in midair. The impact resonated like a gunshot. the billionaire's grip unyielding. "Enough," Victor growled. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of authority, the kind that silences men, the kind that ends careers. Dominic struggled, but Victor's hand did not move. The room watched, mesmerized. This was no longer about money or status. It was about the strength of character, and Dominic had none. Victor shoved him back. Dominic stumbled, his composure unraveling. He looked for support, for validation, but he found only cold stares. Even Celine's grip on his arm loosened. The investors who had once toasted him now turned their faces away. Ilara, still trembling, tried to get up. Victor extended a hand to her. For a moment, doubt flickered in her eyes. But then she took it, and the ballroom erupted again. Cameras flashed like fireworks as the billionaire helped the wife to her feet. It was an image that would be on every newspaper front page by morning. The exposed tyrant, the supported victim, the revealed savior. Dominic knew it. His empire was crumbling in real time. Rage burned in his chest, but he couldn't fight it. Not here. Not now. So he turned to Celine, desperate for validation. "Tell them," he demanded. "Tell them I'm right. Tell them she deserved it." Celine froze. Her painted lips parted, but no words came out. She looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at Victor's penetrating stare. And then she did the one thing Dominic never expected. She took a step back. Her silence was louder than any accusation. She chose her image over loyalty, her ambition over love. She left Dominic standing alone, humiliated, abandoned. The ballroom buzzed with whispers. Is she leaving him? He's finished. This will ruin him. Ilara clung to Victor's arm, her body shaking. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not just tears of pain. For the first time, she felt the faintest hint of something she hadn't known in years. Hope. Dominic, shaking with rage, yelled over the crowd. "This isn't over. You'll regret this, Ilara. You'll regret this, Sterling." But his threats were hollow. No one believed him anymore. The orchestra remained still. The waiters were stopped mid-step. The chandeliers glittered above, but the power in the room had shifted forever. And as security began to approach, as whispers of lawsuits and headlines spread, Victor leaned close to Ilara, his voice low, firm, protective. "You're safe now." But Ilara knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Because Dominic Vance was a man who would rather burn his world to the ground than accept defeat. And he was not done with her. A new dawn. The gala ended in chaos. Security escorted Dominic out of the hall, his protests echoing in the marble corridors, like the cries of a drowning man. Celine slipped away through a side exit, leaving him to face his humiliation alone. Guests whispered behind jeweled hands, their eyes darting between Ilara, frail and trembling, leaning on Victor, and the door Dominic had disappeared through. By the time the cameras stopped flashing and the reporters dispersed, Ilara's body felt broken. Every muscle ached, her back throbbed, and her swollen belly cramped with a dull pain that filled her with terror. She pressed her palm against her stomach again and again, silently begging her baby to stay safe. Victor insisted on taking her home. His black limousine glided through the city streets, silent except for the hum of the engine. Ilara's body was curled against the leather seat, looking out the tinted window, her pale and ghostly reflection in the glass. "Do you need a hospital?" Victor asked, his voice quiet but concerned. She shook her head. "No hospital. If word gets out..." Her voice broke. "I can't let him take this baby from me." Victor didn't press, though his jaw was tight. He knew fear when he heard it, and hers was bone deep. When the car pulled up to her apartment building, Elara hesitated. The thought of entering that place, a home filled with Dominic's perfume, his shadow, his rage, made her stomach churn. But she had nowhere else to go. She thanked Victor with a broken whisper and forced herself inside. The apartment was dark and cold. Every corner held memories of her humiliation. The couch where Dominic had once laughed with her was now just the place where he sat texting Celine. The kitchen table, where they once ate takeout together, was where he had thrown plates in anger. The nursery, still unfinished, mocked her with half-built furniture and unopened boxes of diapers. Elara collapsed on the floor of the nursery. Her body shook with sobs. She pressed both hands against her stomach. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Her tears fell freely. For years, she had held them back, swallowing her pain, convincing herself that resilience was a strength. But now, the dam broke. The sobs were raw, guttural, filling the empty apartment like a confession she had never allowed herself to speak. She cried for the girl she used to be, the hopeful nurse who believed in forever. She cried for the woman she had become, the prisoner of a cruel man's pride. And most of all, she cried for the child inside her, the innocent life tied to the storm of a toxic marriage. Hours passed. She stayed curled up on the floor until the city outside transitioned from night to dawn. Light filtered through the blinds, illuminating her tear-stained face. Her body felt heavy, her mind foggy. And then came a knock on the door. Elara's heart froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She slowly forced herself to her feet and staggered toward the door. "Open up, Elara!" Dominic's voice thundered through the wood. Terror shot through her. She froze, clutching her belly. He had been escorted out of the gala, humiliated in front of hundreds. He should have been hiding. But Dominic was not the kind of man who hid. He was the kind who attacked with twice the force. "I know you're in there!" he yelled. "You think you can embarrass me and get away with it?" His fist slammed against the door again. "You're mine, Elara. Do you hear me? Mine!" Elara's body shook violently. Every instinct told her to run, but there was nowhere to go. She stumbled back, whispering to her baby, "Calm down, please, calm down." Then, silence. The knocking stopped. His voice faded. For a moment, she thought he was gone. She crept to the peephole. The hallway was empty. Relief flooded her, but only briefly, because when she turned around, she saw something on the floor underneath the door, a slip of paper. She picked it up with trembling hands. It was a note, scrawled in Dominic's angry handwriting. "If you think tonight was bad, wait until I'm done with you." Elara's knees buckled. She sank to the floor, clutching the note, her breath ragged. The despair was overwhelming. How could she fight him? He had the money, the power, the rage. She had nothing but her unborn child and a body covered in bruises. For the first time she thought of running, leaving the city, disappearing. But where could she go with no money, no support, no protection? As the sun rose higher, she forced herself to the couch. Her body was pleading for rest, but her mind refused to be still. Every sound from outside, the slam of a car door, the echo of footsteps, made her heart race. Fear settled heavily in her chest, crushing her with every breath. By nightfall, exhaustion won. She fell into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with flashes of Dominic's sneer, Celine's mocking laugh, the whip slamming down on her back. But in the darkest hours of the night, when she woke up gasping from another nightmare, her phone vibrated. She picked it up, her heart racing. A message glowed on the screen from an unknown number. "You don't have to face him alone. I can help." It was from Victor Sterling. Elara's hand trembled as she read the message, over and over. She didn't know whether to feel relief or suspicion. Why would a billionaire get involved in her nightmare? Why would a man like him care about a woman like her? And yet, she remembered the way he had looked at her in the ballroom, not as if she were broken, not as if she were weak, but as if she were worth saving. Her heart pounded as she typed a single response. Why? For a moment there was no reply. Then the screen lit up again. Because I owe a debt to your family, and it's time I paid it. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind, but one truth cut through them all. Her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The path to healing. The photograph with the words, "I'm watching you," haunted Ilara for days. Every night she lay awake in the townhouse, her hand on her belly, listening for footsteps that never came. The note was Dominic's calling card, a promise that he would not stop until he regained control. But what Dominic had not counted on was Ilara's transformation. She was no longer the silent wife who cowered in the shadows. With Victor's protection and the fire of survival burning within her, she was ready not only to defend herself, but to fight back. And she would not do it in silence. The Equinox, Victor's legal team, had been working around the clock, gathering evidence of Dominic's abuse. Medical records of Ilara's bruises, sworn statements from neighbors who had overheard fights, financial records proving his infidelity and misuse of marital assets, even leaked photos of him parading Celine at company events while Ilara was laid up with her pregnancy. Piece by piece, they built a case that would not only end his career, but strip him of every last shred of credibility. Still, Ilara hesitated. "If I take him to court," she whispered to Victor one night, "he'll come after me even harder." Victor's gaze was firm. "That is exactly why you need to take him to court. You don't just need protection, Ilara. You need justice. And once the world knows the truth, he will not have the power to hurt you anymore." Ilara's heart raced. For years, Dominic had silenced her with fear. But now, she had something stronger than fear. Evidence. The court date was set. The story exploded in the media even before the trial began. Headlines screamed, "Investor magnate accused of brutal abuse. Pregnant wife breaks silence. Billionaire Sterling to testify." Dominic raged in his penthouse, throwing furniture, threatening anyone who dared to question him. But it didn't matter how he spun it. The tide had turned. Investors pulled out of his firm. Board members resigned. Celine vanished, taking up with another wealthy executive, leaving Dominic abandoned and furious. The day of the trial arrived. The courthouse steps were lined with reporters. Their cameras flashed as Ilara arrived, dressed in a simple navy blue maternity dress that highlighted her strength instead of her pain. She walked slowly, her 7-month belly leading the way, her hand clutching Victor's arm for support. She looked fragile, but her eyes burned with determination. Dominic arrived minutes later, his once perfect suit rumpled, his hair disheveled. He snarled at reporters, insisting it was all a lie, that Ilara was being manipulated. But the crowd wasn't buying it. They shouted questions, accusations, demands for answers. For the first time, Dominic was not commanding respect. He was drowning in contempt. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The judge, a severe woman with decades of experience, watched silently as the trial began. Ilara took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but then it grew firmer as she recounted the years of control, the cruel words, the humiliation, and finally, the gala. The room fell silent as she described the whip, the lashes, the fear of losing her baby. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to break. Then Victor testified. His voice carried authority, recounting what he had witnessed at the gala. His words painted Dominic not just as a cruel husband, but as an untrustworthy man, a man who had abused power both at home and in public. "No amount of wealth," Victor said firmly, "gives a man the right to destroy another human being." The defense tried to malign Alara. They called her dramatic, unstable, hormonal. They suggested she was exaggerating. But when the photographs of her bruises were shown on the courtroom screens, the lies crumbled. Gasps echoed through the room as the images told a story that no words could deny. And then came the final blow. One of Dominic's own employees testified, revealing that Celine had bragged about replacing Alara, laughing at Dominic's cruelty as if it were entertainment. The betrayal was undeniable. Dominic was not just abusive, he was shameless. By the end of the trial, the verdict was inevitable. The judge's gavel struck. Dominic Vance was found guilty of domestic abuse and financial misconduct. He was stripped of his position at his firm, ordered to pay damages, and forbidden from ever contacting Alara again. The room erupted in whispers. Reporters scrambled to file breaking news, and Alara, with tears streaming, clutched her belly and whispered a single word: free. But the victory was not just legal, it was public. That night, television screens across the country replayed the images of Alara standing in front of the courthouse, Victor by her side. News anchors praised her bravery. Social media was flooded with messages of support. "Alara is a hero. Justice for survivors. No woman should suffer in silence." For the first time in years, Alara was not invisible. She was a symbol. Dominic, meanwhile, languished in a jail cell. His empire was reduced to ashes. His name was tarnished. Celine had already moved on, taking up with another rich man, leaving Dominic with nothing but bitterness. He had lost everything: his power, his fortune, his wife, his son. Alara did not celebrate his downfall. She no longer needed revenge. She had something far greater: peace. Months later, Alara stood on a stage at a charity gala, not as a humiliated wife, but as the keynote speaker. Her emerald dress shimmered under the lights, her hair loose and radiant. Victor sat in the audience, his eyes fixed on her as she spoke. "I once believed that silence was survival," Alara began, her voice carrying across the room. "I thought that if I endured, if I stayed silent, things would get better. But silence doesn't protect us. Speaking out does. Tonight I stand here, not as a victim, but as a mother, a survivor, and a woman who refuses to be broken. To every woman listening to me, you are stronger than you know, and you are never alone." The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed, but this time, Alara welcomed the attention. She was no longer invisible. She was a voice, a force, a light. Afterward, Victor approached her, his expression unreadable. "You've changed everything tonight," he said softly. Alara smiled, tears in her eyes. "No, I just finally remembered who I was meant to be." The two of them stood together, watching as guests lined up to pledge donations to causes that supported survivors. Alara felt Leo's small hand grabbing hers. The warmth of her son anchored her to the future, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to dream. Not of survival, not of escape, but of happiness. Dominic's shadow was gone. The chains were broken, and Alara Jones, once beaten, silenced, and forgotten, was reborn. Because when a woman rises from the ashes, she doesn't just survive, she soars. So that's the end of Alara's story. But perhaps you're still here with me, listening to the very last word. If so, it means something moved you. It means a part of this story spoke to your own heart. And perhaps that's the real lesson. No matter how heavy the suffering, there is always a way to rise again. As the Stoics remind us, what stands in the way becomes the way. Pain can break us, but it can also mold us into someone stronger. If this story moved you, my dear friends, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, like it, and subscribe so we can journey through more tales of courage together. Because healing begins the moment we realize we are never truly alone.